The subway rattled along the dark tunnels, a faint hum filling the air as people sat quietly, lost in their own thoughts. Among them was a tired young mother named Sarah, clutching a worn-out bag with one hand and holding onto her daughter's lunchbox with the other. Her eyes were heavy, the exhaustion of juggling 2 jobs, night shifts, and raising her little girl finally catching up to her. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her daughter was all she had, and Sarah was determined to give her a better life, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. That evening, she sank into the subway seat, grateful to find a spot after a long day of scrubbing offices and waiting tables. The rhythmic motion of the train lulled her, and before she knew it, her head slipped sideways and landed gently on the shoulder of the man sitting next to her. The man stiffened at first, startled, but when he turned his head he saw her worn-out face framed by loose strands of hair, her body clearly drained of all energy. He didn't move. Instead, he sat still, allowing her to rest. The man was Daniel King, one of the most powerful CEO in the city. To most people, he was unreachable, a name in magazines and business headlines, but to Sarah, he was just a stranger on the train. He glanced at her bag on the floor and noticed the children's lunchbox peeking out, the faint drawings on it showing a child's love. Something inside him softened. He had lived his life surrounded by wealth, luxury, and people who always wanted something from him. But in this woman, he saw nothing but raw struggle and honesty. When the train stopped at the next station, some passengers sneered, whispering about how a poor woman had fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder. But Daniel didn't care. He adjusted slightly, making sure her head stayed comfortably on him, and gave the onlookers a cold stare that silenced them instantly. Sarah woke up suddenly at her stop, embarrassed as soon as she realized where her head had rested. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, gathering her things quickly. Her cheeks flushed red as she tried to avoid eye contact. Daniel gave her a small, kind smile. "Don't apologize. You looked like you needed that rest." She nodded awkwardly, muttered another thank you, and hurried out before the doors closed. But the image of her tired eyes lingered in his mind long after she was gone. The next morning, fate intervened. Daniel was walking into a small cafe near his office when he spotted her again, Sarah, wearing a faded uniform behind the counter. She froze when their eyes met, instantly recognizing him. She expected him to ignore her or even look down on her, but instead he greeted her politely and ordered coffee like any other customer. Over the next few days he kept coming back. At first, Sarah thought it was coincidence, but soon she realized he was deliberately choosing her cafe. Their conversations grew little by little. She was cautious, never asking who he was, and he never volunteered it. To her, he was just Daniel, a kind stranger who treated her with unusual respect. But to him, she was a reminder of real strength, the kind built from love and sacrifice. One evening, when she rushed out of work to pick up her daughter, Daniel offered her a ride. She hesitated but agreed, only because the buses were running late and her daughter was waiting outside school. When he dropped them off, Daniel finally met little Emily, a cheerful girl with big, curious eyes who clung tightly to her mother. The way Emily's face lit up when Sarah hugged her melted his heart. Over the next weeks, Daniel became a quiet part of their lives, helping when he could but never in a way that made Sarah feel small. He admired her pride, her refusal to beg or complain. One night, Emily fell ill and Sarah panicked, not knowing how she would pay for the hospital. Without asking, Daniel pulled strings, made calls, and ensured Emily was treated immediately. Sarah was overwhelmed, tears brimming in her eyes, but she didn't know how to repay him. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "Sometimes people just need someone to believe in them." Still, Sarah kept her distance, feeling the gap between their worlds. She had seen enough of life to know that people like Daniel didn't stay long in the lives of women like her. But Daniel was different. When Sarah's cafe shut down unexpectedly, she found herself jobless, broken, and afraid of losing everything. That night, she rode the subway again, clutching Emily's lunchbox, tears streaming down her face. And just like fate intended, Daniel was there, waiting. He sat beside her, just as he had that first night, and when she cried on his shoulder this time, he wrapped an arm around her and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." The truth came out eventually. Sarah learned who he really was. Shocked, she felt betrayed, but Daniel explained he had never hidden it out of shame, only because he wanted her to see him as a man, not a CEO. He offered her not just financial help, but an opportunity to work in his company, where her hard work and intelligence could shine. Though hesitant, she accepted, determined to prove herself. Months later, the poor single mom who once fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder in the subway was now standing tall, respected, and building a future for herself and her daughter. People were stunned by the story when it spread, but for Sarah, it wasn't about shock or headlines. It was about a chance encounter that turned into hope, love, and the reminder that even in the darkest tunnels of life, sometimes you find a shoulder strong enough to carry you toward the light. Life has a way of placing people in the most unexpected places at the most unexpected times, weaving moments together that seem ordinary on the surface but later reveal themselves to be life-changing, and for Sarah, a poor single mom battling exhaustion and despair, that life-changing moment began on a crowded subway car late one evening. She had been working double shifts, balancing her job at a small cafe during the day and cleaning offices at night, all while trying to raise her daughter Emily with dignity and hope. And though she never complained, her body carried the heavy burden of endless days without rest, her eyes showing the weariness that her smile often tried to hide. And when she finally sat down in the subway after a long day, clutching Emily's small lunchbox in one hand and her worn-out handbag in the other, the rhythmic sway of the train lulled her to sleep before she could even fight it, her head slipping gently onto the shoulder of the man sitting beside her, a man who in that moment was just another passenger, though the world knew him as Daniel King, one of the wealthiest and most influential CEO in the city. Yet Sarah had no idea who he was, and all Daniel felt as her tired head leaned against him was a stirring of compassion, a softness he rarely allowed himself to feel in the cutthroat world of business. For a man accustomed to boardrooms, power, and people who only sought his wealth, there was something deeply human in the sight of this woman, worn down yet still clutching onto the symbols of her love for her child. And so instead of moving away or waking her, Daniel simply let her rest, adjusting slightly so she could be more comfortable. And when other passengers whispered or sneered at the sight of a poor woman leaning on a stranger, his sharp gaze silenced them, and he sat still until she finally startled awake at her stop, embarrassed and apologizing with flushed cheeks, her voice quiet as she whispered, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." But he stopped her gently, offering a smile that was both kind and unexpected, telling her softly, "Don't apologize. You looked like you needed that rest." And though she muttered another thank you and hurried away before the doors closed, that brief moment etched itself into both of their memories. The very next morning, fate tied their paths together again when Daniel, in search of a quieter breakfast than his usual corporate routine, stepped into a small cafe near his office only to find Sarah behind the counter in her faded uniform, her face pale with surprise when she recognized him, instantly fearing he would mock her or treat her with the same pity others often did. But instead he greeted her politely, ordered coffee, and treated her as though nothing unusual had happened. And though she kept their interaction short, the next day he returned, and then again, and slowly she realized it was no coincidence that this powerful man had chosen her cafe deliberately, though he never revealed who he truly was and she never asked, content to know him only as Daniel, a kind stranger who spoke to her as if she mattered. And in those conversations that blossomed between orders of coffee and hurried shifts, he discovered the strength in her humility, the fire in her sacrifices, the quiet determination that kept her going when the world tried to break her. In time, Daniel offered her small kindnesses, a ride when the buses ran late, a hand when she was juggling too much. And it was on one of those evenings that he met Emily, the bright-eyed little girl whose laughter lit up Sarah's tired world. And in Emily's joy, Daniel saw a reflection of the love Sarah poured into her child despite the hardships, a love that stirred something new and unexplainable within him. As the weeks unfolded, Daniel became more than a stranger, becoming a steady presence, though Sarah's pride kept her cautious, never wanting to accept too much. never wanting to seem like a burden until the night Emily fell sick, and Sarah, frantic and terrified, confessed she didn't have the money for the hospital, and without hesitation Daniel made the calls, pulled the strings, and ensured Emily was treated immediately, standing by Sarah's side through the long night. And when Sarah tried to thank him, her voice breaking with tears, he looked into her eyes and said, "You don't owe me anything. Sometimes people just need someone to believe in them." Words that left her trembling because no one had said anything like that to her in years. Yet still she kept a distance, feeling the chasm between their worlds, fearing that whatever bond was forming was fragile, until the day she lost her job when the cafe shut down, and she found herself riding the subway again with tears streaming down her face, clutching Emily's lunchbox just as she had that first night. Only this time she was more broken than ever, and as if destiny itself had been waiting for that moment, Daniel appeared once more, sitting beside her quietly, letting her lean into him again as he wrapped an arm around her and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." Words that carried more weight than promises of riches, words that spoke of loyalty and presence, and a kind of love that did not vanish with circumstances. It was then that Sarah finally discovered who he truly was, the CEO whose name she had seen on newspapers and billboards, and at first she felt betrayed, confused why he hadn't told her, but Daniel explained that he never wanted her to see him through the lens of wealth or power, only as the man who saw her strength and wanted to stand beside it, and though hesitant, she accepted when he offered her not charity, but an opportunity to prove herself within his company, where her intelligence and dedication soon earned her respect. And as months passed, Sarah transformed from the exhausted single mom, sleeping on a stranger's shoulder, to a woman standing tall in her own right, building a future for Emily that once seemed impossible. While Daniel, the man who once carried the weight of wealth and loneliness, found in Sarah and Emily the family he never knew he was missing, and when their story spread, people were shocked, headlines buzzed, and whispers filled the city. But for Sarah, it was never about shocking anyone. It was about a simple truth, that in the darkest tunnels of life, sometimes you fall asleep on a stranger's shoulder, only to wake up and discover you've found a partner, a friend, and a love strong enough to carry you into the light.